Hey everyone, my name is Becky Otten. I am the Senior Manager of Financial Planning and Analysis at Best Friends Animal Society. We are asked to come up with a budget template to help shelters and municipalities budget for their upcoming fiscal or calendar year. So I'm going to run through that model with you here today as a step-by-step instructions on how this works. And hopefully it's pretty self-explanatory. What we're looking at here is the instructions tab. I'm not going to read through this, but it's here for your reference. So if you get stuck on something or you're not sure how a specific tab works, this first instructions tab is here for you as a reference. So before we jump into everything, I just want to show you basically how this works. There are 8 input tabs, which you see along the bottom, and they are in orange. So if it's an orange tab, it's an input tab. And then at the end, there are 2 yellow highlighted tabs. And this is ultimately what is going to be populated by what you put into the orange tabs. So this is a little more detail on a income statement view, and then there's a snapshot view, which will just summarize some of the statistics and the expenses for your budget year. So let's go ahead and jump in. This first sheet is really easy. It's just looking for your name. You just type that in of your shelter or your organization. What the fiscal year is for your budget. Now, if this is calendar year, that's fine. This is how this is set up now. So we're going to budget for 2021, and our year starts on January 1st. Now, if you're like Best Friends, our fiscal year starts on 10/1. And all this is going to do is change the months in those columns to have the appropriate label, okay? So I'll show you what that looks like here. That's all this tab is for, and we can go ahead and move on to the next one. So the date we input drives the months that you see across the top here on row 2. So this is the activity tab. This is going to be where you're going to input your length of stay, how many animals you generally intake between dog, cat, kitten, foster. The information you enter here is going to drive not only certain costs, but it's also going to drive some of your revenues. So we're going to go through all that, but this is really important to get this sort of accurate. It doesn't have to be perfect. It is just a budget. So we're going to go ahead and just populate some of this data. So also, before we get too far into here, you're going to notice along the bottom where these orange tabs are, they have a lock next to them. And that means that the sheet is protected. At the end, I'll show you how to unprotect them and if you need to look at a formula or change a label. But they're protected so that you don't accidentally click somewhere where you're not supposed to. So anywhere you're supposed to input has these shaded orange cells, and that's what this comment refers to. Okay, so for dogs, first you'd enter your desired length of stay, the number of days you expect the dogs to be there on average. As you type in that first number in the first month, you see that that carries forward. That's just there for convenience. So certainly feel free to override that if your length of stay changes maybe throughout the summer months or any, seasonality that you might have there. And then we need to enter how many dogs you would have at the beginning of the year. So hopefully not too many. We hope they're all going into homes. And here you're going to enter how many intakes you expect to get per month. So I'm just going to do a really basic example. Maybe 20 intakes here in the winter, and then as we start to ramp up into the spring, maybe it's a little more. And you would just input this based on your history or what you hope to accomplish that year. There's also a section for reclaims if that's applicable to you. Maybe a month get reclaimed where you're not adopting them out or caring for them anymore. And then here we're going to enter how many adoptions you get per month on average. So remember, this is just for dogs right now. So we want to adopt out, of course, as many as we can. But that might change. I'm just going to make this example here. Um, you'll notice I just typed in 25 adoptions and it highlighted in a cell below it -3 in that pink cell because I can't adopt out more dogs than I have. So if you put in too many, the spreadsheet has functionality like this that brings it to your attention that no, this doesn't make sense. So then you would just change it. Okay, so just gonna do this as an example. So then there's some statistics down here for adoption-driven capacity and required holding capacity. The definitions of those are actually here. The number of animals to have up for adoption at any time to optimize your length of stay and your live release. And then the holding capacity is the number of animals that's needed for housing at any time on average. So that should help you. Let's say you have 3 kennels and here your average is 5. This should help you understand that maybe maybe there's a problem where you can't house 5 on average, you can only house 3. So then you would come back up and change your statistics up here to make that make sense for your organization. Okay, so that's dogs. The only last piece we have is how many spays and neuters that you do, and this is based on the number of intakes. We've pre-populated it with 100%, assuming you spay or neuter 100% of your animals that come in the door. But if that's different, you can just override that percentage, and you can see that the number of surgeries down below changes. Okay. And again, for cats, we're going to just put in some data quickly here, just for demonstration purposes, so you can see how these numbers drive the costs in this model. So there's dogs, there's cats, there's kittens. If you house kittens in your facility, this would not include any foster kittens. We're going to look at that in a second. And then if you participate in any community cat activities, you can enter that here. This is just to calculate the cost of the spay and neuter. Okay, so actually let's just say we help 50 per month, just for demonstration. And down here is your foster activity. Again, you probably don't have too many costs related to foster, but the tool does allow us to attribute maybe a small expense to cover some of the medical or some of the food costs in foster. And also, if any are adopted out of foster and you collect adoption fees for those, it's going to calculate the revenue for that. So let's just put in an example. Okay, and you can kind of see how all the numbers change as we go along. It's nothing to be intimidated by, but it certainly is a useful tool to really help you with those metrics and those statistics. Okay, if you do transports, you can enter those there so it calculates right. And again, if you're spaying and neutering those fosters that you intake, maybe they don't make it to your facility first, but you pay for them, that's what you want to represent here. Okay, so this is our activity tab, and you could always come back and change this later, but this is just a starting point. So we're going to move on to the next tab, the cost per animal. And this is going to use the information that we put into this activity tab, and you're going to enter here on average per month per animal, how much do you spend on these things? So for dogs, for cats, the kittens in the nursery, the community cats and the foster pets, all those categories that we just looked at on the activity tab. This allows you again to input how much it costs to care for them. So this isn't going to be a holistic cost. This is just those costs that are driven by volume. So maybe for dogs, it's $5 each. Maybe it costs $10 a month to feed them on the average each. You get the idea here. So let's just fill some of this in. Maybe cats are less expensive, and maybe we pay a little bit for food for foster pets. And you can see as I type these numbers in that this area down here fills in with dollars. So, and the basis is over here in column G. So medications we're basing on the number of intakes. The food we're basing on the average in care. The clinic supplies is also based on intakes. And then here's some costs for vet care and spay neuter. So maybe you pay a flat fee for each exam per animal to an external vet. This is where you would capture that. Maybe it's $25 to spay. Maybe it's, might be different for dogs and cats, which is why we broke it out. And maybe you just have a routine vet come in and maybe they charge you $5 an animal just to kind of check on everybody, once a week or whatever the case is. So you get the idea. We're just going to finish filling this out. So then you can see down here that this is calculating those annual costs based on the volume, based on the amounts that you typed in above. So for budget purposes, we're going to split this evenly among 12 months. In reality, you might have some kitten costs that are, maybe they're more expensive in the summer months and less expensive in the winter months. This model doesn't take that type of seasonality into effect. It just spreads it evenly. So it would be the $38,000 here divided by 12. So we'll see that later. Again, so you might have portions of this model that don't apply to you because, again, maybe you don't have kittens, maybe you don't participate in a community cat program, that type of thing. So if it doesn't apply to you, just feel free to ignore it. You don't have to delete it or anything. Just breeze over those sections that don't apply. I mention it because this next tab might be one that doesn't apply to everybody. So this is the public clinic. This is if you are open for public services. This helps you calculate what that revenue and some of that cost might be. So again, we're going to just go month by month here and enter how many days a week we're open. Maybe in the winter. Okay, so again, I pre-populated it, but you can override any of these. So maybe in the winter, we're open 5 days a week, but maybe in the summertime, in the spring, we're open 7 days a week. Okay, so you can just change that as needed. And then here you're going to enter how many appointments you take on average per day. So of those 5 days a week, maybe each day we do 20 appointments. Okay, and that carries forward as well, and you can feel free to change that if that applies. So this next section below is just, we're going to type in the charge that we charge our public for these services. And these are pre-populated with just basic services. You can feel free to override this. Make something up here so you could see how this also changed. Okay, so you just change it in one spot. I'm going to just undo that. And then we're just going to enter how much we charge. So maybe we charge $15 for a consult. Maybe we do dentals, maybe we don't. Again, you would just change this based on the basic categories of services that you provide. There might be more than this, but you just really want to use, if you do like 2 a year, you don't really want to budget for that sort of thing. So let's just go ahead and fill this out. Charge $25 for spays and neuters. So that's our price that we charge the public. This is going to drive our revenue. And then down below, we're going to put in the percentage on average, how many consultation fee appointments we have. Maybe we get just 10% of those. Maybe we don't really do many dentals or mass removals or surgeries. So you could see as I fill that out that this row 23, it's highlighted in red because this does need to equal 100%. So that's just another quality control check here. So maybe we do a lot of surgeries, and you can see as I filled that in that red section went away. And again, this is carried forward, but feel free to override any of the future months if the seasonality in the mix is different depending on the season. And then down here, it's calculated our revenue based on how many appointments per month, and the charge that we do and the percentage of those procedures. So it weighs all that to estimate what your monthly revenue is going to be. Okay, just gives you a little statistic on average per appointment, see if that's in line with what you expect. And sorry, over here, there is a total for the year if you need to see that. So that's all driven for revenue basis inputs. Down below here, I just have a little section for expenses. Obviously, it's going to cost you something to do these appointments. So maybe it's $5 per appointment and supplies. And again, this is on average. Um, Maybe you have a management software for your public clinic that you have to pay for. It's $500 a month. We just don't want you to forget these little things that you do have to consider. And if you contract vets, you're going to enter that cost here. This would just be contract expenses related to this clinic. Okay, if you have vets on staff that cover the public clinic, we're going to look at that in the compensation tab, which is next. So this is really just for external expenses. And again, maybe I just bring someone in the summer months and they're gonna, I don't know, maybe I pay them $250 a month just to kind of cover here and there for me. That's what that's for. And then there's just a couple other sections where you can enter any other random type expenses that haven't been accounted for yet. Okay. So that's the public clinic tab. We're going to go ahead and move over to the compensation tab. And again, you can come back and change any of these things depending on, if you change your mind on the road or if someone else takes a look at it and says, well, that doesn't really make sense. You can override these at any time. And we're going to see at the end, again, how all this pulls together in those yellow summary tabs here. Okay. So for compensation, this is set up a little different. We have some basic categories of where you might have somebody on staff, administration, animal care, clinic. And again, if your internal vet is taking care of that public clinic service for you, this is where you would budget that cost. And then this is really just a placeholder for you to enter in any other position that you don't see a slot for above. So the way this works is that in column C, you're going to choose if the position is a salaried position or if it's an hourly position. And there's just this drop down box when you click on the cell where you can change that. Okay. If it's salary, we don't need you to tell us how many hours a week the person works because they're on salary, obviously. So you just leave that blank. And then for the hourly folks, you want to say how many hours a week they work. And this is going to be a drop-down menu as well. Okay, it ranges anywhere from 5 hours a week to 40 hours a week. Then you want to enter the rate that you pay them, and this is just the base compensation rate. It wouldn't include taxes, it wouldn't include overtime. This is just strictly what they're hired for. So again, we just have some placeholder dollar amounts in here, and you would edit those based on what makes sense to you. So maybe your animal care manager is at $40,000 and you have a couple specialists. The full-time specialist is 15, but the part-time ones are 12. Okay, you can edit these again however you want, and where it says placeholder position, or actually any of these, you could just type over what that position, what the title is that makes sense to you. Okay. And here in the months October through September, or whatever your fiscal year is, you're just going to type in a 1 in the months for how many positions you have. So I have one executive director all year long. We pay them 12 months out of the year. But maybe your pet care specialists are a little bit more seasonal. So you might have a full-time 40-hour person. But maybe for the part-time folks, again, maybe in the spring, summer months when it's busier, you might have 2. Let's just say. And you don't have to do this as a one-to-one, like a name to a position, although you can if you want to. You can type in, 2 pet care specialists that work 20 hours a week. It allows you to do that. And then over here to the right, it's just calculating that monthly cost. Okay, and again, you can't type over this. This is math. These are formulas that calculate that total. So at the bottom here, it just tells you, it adds up how many head counts you have in each month, and that total base compensation expense. So again, you just want to make sure that this makes sense with what you expect. Okay, so it's pretty easy. Hopefully it gives you everything you need. So let's move on to revenue. So for revenue, we have pre-populated many different types of revenue that you may get, from general donations to adoption donations to events, mailings, any type of income that you could possibly have, in most cases. So from rows 3 to 17 contain those pre-populated types of revenue. You can't override these because they are linked up to a summary, which we'll look at again on this financial summary tab. But there are a couple rows down here. If you do have a different kind of revenue, you can just edit this description and enter the amounts for it. So again, maybe you have some reoccurring donations. You might know what you expect here. You might not know what you expect here. Maybe things are slower in the winter. Again, you can type in whatever makes sense for your organization. Okay. So you would just do that for each of the types. And then down below, we have the section that calculates adoption revenue. So here in column B, you would enter your what you charge. So if you charge $25 for a dog adoption, $5 for a cat adoption, $10 for a kitten adoption, you just type that in here and it's going to calculate the revenue based on that activity that we typed in way over here on step 2. Okay, so you see it's just pulling those numbers forward. You don't have to retype them in, it's linking to that tab. So here on row 29, we have the total adoption revenue that we expect based on the volume. Okay, so this would add up everything that you typed in above with your calculated adoption revenue. That gives you your revenue excluding what we did on the public clinic tab, if that applies to you. So let me actually just enter in a couple other things here so you can kind of see how this works. Okay. And then let's move on to the expense detail. This tab kind of pulls together everything that we've already done with an opportunity for you to add more expenses. So the top section here is compensation expenses. As you can see, this $105,000 is what we had calculated on the compensation tab. It's pulling this information directly over. But what we didn't budget for on the compensation tab was overtime. If you budget for that at all, you would do it here. Also, we have employer taxes. So this would be your federal taxes and your state taxes. And this is set up as a % of compensation. So on the average, we pay as an employer 7.5% on compensation costs to the government. So this will change depending on what state you operate in. And you can just look at your historical financials to get that percentage. It would just be your taxes divided into your salaries to get that factor. And the same with the benefits. It's set up the same way, where it's just a % of compensation costs. So again, it's not everybody takes benefits, not everybody's eligible for benefits. So this would just be on average, how much of those benefit costs in relation to compensation do you expect? So you would just type in your factors here. Again, if they're different and it updates for the year, these are things that don't change. So there's no option to override. Okay. Then down below we have the non-compensation pieces. So we have animal care. These expenses from medications down through vet care, these come directly from that cost per animal. So we see our 37,669 over here, and we see that same amount over here. So on the cost per animal tab, again, we were just calculating it annually in total. That's why it's just, we don't show the months, it's just one number. And then over here is where we just take it and we divided it evenly by 12. Okay. Then there's opportunities for you to add more expenses. So these are the volume driven costs. But then, of course, you're going to have other things like your supplies to clean, right? And as we all know, that's going up these days. So whatever you would spend each month on cleaning supplies or anything else that applies to you, again, you just type over this for what it is. Um, so that would be all your animal care costs. Then we have more categories here for your facility, for marketing, for professional fees, and you can see the different types of expenses that fall into here. If you have IT costs, and then other types of office supplies. Oh, we have a lot. Training and appreciation and any kind of travel expenses you may incur if you do transport or anything like that. So again, these are pre-populated with some of the general expense categories, but in each area there are sections where you can put in your own. One thing I do want to point out, if you have any type of loan, either on your property or on equipment or anything, let's just assume maybe you have a mortgage on your building. I just want to point out that the mortgage interest, it does roll into your expenses and onto your income statement, but the principal payment on your debt does not. But we did include it here because it's important to remember that you have to raise enough funds to cover everything. So we didn't want to leave this out. Let's just make an example. Your interest doesn't change, it's fixed at $1,500 a month, and your principal payment, I don't know, let's just say it's $2,000. We're just going to see how this looks in the summary. Then, of course, you have utilities and taxes, and I'm not going to spend time filling all this out, but you get the idea. And let's just throw some costs in here too. Professional fees if you pay for a payroll service or you have independent contractors, any other type of accounting audit fee, maybe once a year we incur that. IT, if you have to replace computers once a year or whatever the case is, you might pay for internet. I mean, you probably definitely pay for internet access, that type of thing, and so on and so forth. So at the end, this summarizes everything that you typed in above and pulled over from the other tabs that we talked about. And down here, we're also pulling in on row 106, those non-comp expenses from the public clinic. So this is 36,000, and that's what our calculation was over here. Okay, so it's just pulling everything together for you. Again, you would only type in the orange cells and everything else is automatic. We've also built in an assumption for credit card fee processing at 3%. So we assumed, of course, some people pay for things with cash or checks. So we based this cost on 75% of the revenue. Okay, so it's just 3% fee on top of 75% of the revenue to get you that credit card fee. Again, that's what the processor charges you on the back end. If this is a new facility, you're going to want to enter some information on startup capital. Or if you plan on maybe adding a vehicle or some other new capital item, you can indicate that here. So maybe we need a new washer this year. If it's obviously a new building, you're going to want to input all the construction costs if this is a pro forma to maybe do a campaign with for fundraising. Okay, but if not, again, you just ignore that. So this is the end of our input tabs, and now we're going to see how everything rolls over to the financial summary. So again, you can't click on any of these cells, it's all protected, so you don't accidentally type over something. But it's pulling in all the revenue from everything we entered in the revenue tab, everything we entered under the clinic, if we have that, and it pulls it all together. So this is your annual total. And then you can come down and see how everything else is falling. So you have your salary costs. Those are based on the positions from the compensation tab. We added in that overtime, the taxes and the benefits that we entered on that expense detail tab to get you your annual compensation costs. Then we basically have everything else. So your animal costs, your supplies, your training, your marketing, your occupancy, utilities, travel, all those other categories that we saw here. Okay, it's pulling those over in total, whereas here you have the individual detail. Okay, so this is really for a higher level presentation to your board or to your public to show what your budget is. They don't need to see all of this stuff, but you do need to think about that in terms of budgeting on what makes up those expenses. So this is really for presentation. Nice clean slate. It gives you all the categories and to get to your total expenses. Okay, so that would include the non-compensation related costs plus the compensation related expenses. And that's going to get you your net change in assets on row 38 here. So this is actually showing we have a surplus of $61,000, which is awesome. Let me back up a second because I need to go talk about depreciation expense. And that's going to be under this occupancy section. Depreciation expense is also one of those things that it's not a cash expense. I know internally, like we exclude this when we're figuring out what our budget needs to be. It does hit our income statement, so it does show up on the financial summary and in our audit, of course, but it's depreciating assets that we have already paid for in the past. So if you have any of that, you just want to type in what that depreciation expense is going to be on your existing assets. And then if you're putting on anything new, like we added a washer and dryer, you just want to make sure to account for whatever that monthly depreciation will be for that new asset. So again, even though we don't need to come up with fundraising to cover the cost of this, we do show that in occupancy expenses. But down below here, I just want to point this out. So this is the net change in assets as it would be presented on an audit. But down here, I'm going to back out that depreciation expense because, again, it's a non-cash expense that I don't need to fundraise for. And then the other thing we talked about was the principal payment on the debt. That again does not hit your expense statement, but you do need to consider that you need to cover that cost when you're fundraising. So this is another $24,000 that we have to come up with. Okay, so the cash required for your operations is just the net of those things, taking out depreciation and adding in those principal payments you might have to get you to your real true cash budget. Then down below, we just had, if we had any startup expenses, this is where we entered the washer dryer costs. Or if this was a brand new facility and you were just starting up, those startup costs would be incorporated here so you can get a holistic approach on what your entire project costs. Okay, and again, this is only on the first year. If that's, you know, sometimes when you're operating a new facility, you need to project for multiple years at a time. So this is only the first 12 months with those startup costs, but certainly you can save this model as a different version and do year 1, year 2, year 3, you know, whatever you need to show for your company. So this is it on the financial summary. This header is going to populate with what we input over here on your facility information. Okay. And then over the last tab is the snapshot. And this just pulls together the metrics that we already typed in. So maybe we want to know how many intakes and adoptions and community cats. You know, again, this is driven off of the data that we input over on the activity tab. All right. Also pulls in some of those budget components. So we pay 3 people. We have some extra costs of $500 for that washer dryer. And this is just super high level summarizing the information that we saw on the financial summary here. So it's just, again, that's why it's called Snapshot. It's just a snapshot of all your metrics and your budget for the year to show you super high level where you land. So this is the entire workbook. But before we go, I do want to just point out a couple things. In the instructions tab, there is, if you need assistance with this, the Best Friends Network email address is here for your reference. If you're really stuck, I hope this is intuitive enough that you can get it pretty easily, but you never know. So if you need help, just email that address. And then the last thing I want to touch on before we go is how to unprotect these sheets. So maybe you want to see how this formula works. For example, you can't click on this cell because it's locked, and it's locked so that you don't accidentally override the formula that's in here. But if you were curious and you wanted to see, or for any other reason you wanted to change something, um, all you would do is come up to your review toolbar in Excel and click this unprotect sheet icon. Okay. And what that's going to do is now it allows you to click anywhere. And now you can actually see that formula and how it works. Okay. So again, like, the danger with this though is that you can like accidentally delete this and then what? So that's why we have them protected. Um, but again, for any reason, if you did want to unprotect it, that is how you do it. You would have to do it for each tab that you want to look at. And then I recommend when you're done that you actually just go up and reprotect it. So you just be protecting the sheet and not the workbook. And when you do that, this box pops up and it asks you what you want to protect. And just make sure that this checkbox is enabled where you can select the unlocked cells. Okay, otherwise you wouldn't be able to type the numbers into the orange cells. So that's how that all works. I really hope this was intuitive and it helps you guys with your budget process. I think also before we go, let me just show you what this looks like. We had it set as 10-1 for the fiscal start. So over here on the financial summary now, you can see that my year starts with January. It doesn't start with October like it did before. And also the date changes over here on the header here. The year starting and that sort of thing. So it's really just cosmetic for your current information. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time today. I hope you find this useful, and happy budgeting.